Hey everyone, I'm Shane Ireland.
And I'm Truett Smith.
Welcome to another episode of All Pipes Considered. Today we're talking about a legend, a living legend.
For real.
I would say one of the most sneakily influential pipe makers of modern times. A good friend of ours and also a focus of both of our personal collections, yes. I would say.
We're both smoking.
We're both smoking.
His work
right now. Often are on camera. Today we're talking about the man himself, Hans Former Nielsen.
Yeah, you've known Former for how many years now?
Well, I met him in Chicago before I worked in the business. So the first time I met Former was probably in 2012 in Chicago. We're a super guy, like just an awesome guy, a gentle soul, really, really willing to sit down and talk about his work and pipes in general with some kid, basically,
yeah.
you know.
But you went to his workshop probably first time in
2014. Yeah. So I've been visiting Former in Denmark and then seeing him in the U.S. for over a decade, and we've had a nice business relationship and a good friendship for a very long time now. And I'm just a huge fan of his work. I mean, there are a lot of pipe makers from that era that have contributed in massive ways to artisan pipe making going forward. And like I said, not only the literal fact that he pioneered a lot of techniques, a lot of shaping, sort of honing in on what separated the Danish classic aesthetic from the Anglo-French sort of takes on the same shapes. He also was widely regarded by many of his contemporaries who we think of as the best pipe makers that have ever lived. Perrinol from S. Bang, everybody at the W.O. Larson workshop, Tony Nielsen, all the people that worked under Former. He was regarded, Konowitz, he was regarded as the guy that you went to if you wanted to figure out how to do something in your workshop with your machinery, how to make custom tools. Like there was so many technical things because he's a machinist by trade, Former. So there's so many technical aspects of pipe making, especially back in the day where these guys couldn't just go online and order tools specific to their work. Most of being a pipe maker was also crafting the materials and the tools necessary to be able to do this.
You could almost argue Former's like a craftsperson / machinist first, and pipe maker second.
Oh, absolutely. And I would guess that he would think of himself that way too. Like there is obviously artistry and creativity in his work, but one of the reasons that he is sort of regarded as like the man when it comes to like classic shapes in particular, classic Danish forms, is because it's all about function. It's all about function, and then basically from there you have some ability to branch out and do some fun stuff, some interesting stuff, which he does very often.
And then you see that talk about how he got his start, because did he start out making handmade pipes? Because I know he worked at Bentley, he has factory experience as well.
Long history of making a lot of pipes. So I believe he was 16 years old when he started working with Paul Rasmussen. And at that time, I believe the first, I'm a little iffy on how long of a period this was, if it was months or if it was even the first couple of years. But for sure in the beginning, all he did was repair work. And I think that also gives a lot of context to a pipe maker as a designer later on in their career, where it's I saw the pipes coming back with these specific problems.
What can I do to keep those problems from happening?
To minimize this from happening, and also that improves your customer's experience. So I think that's one of the main things that I've heard Former say over and over and over again, is that the way the pipes are going to perform, the way they're going to smoke, and how they're going to last as heirloom pieces are first and foremost, in his focus, even more so than design, I think. And again, when you've been doing it this long, and when you've been doing it through that many different types of pipe making, making classic shapes like this, he can do it in his sleep. He can do it with his eyes closed. So yeah, started off repairing pipes with Paul Rasmussen at about 16. Started branching out more into actually manufacturing some pipes, and then a little bit later working for W.O. Larson, making pipes from start to finish, and managing the operation at the W.O. Larson factory. That's where he oversaw some of the other well-known Danish pipe makers that have gone on to do great things on their own. And like I said, when you make that many pipes, you're talking thousands and thousands of pipes over that first couple of decades of his career.
I've heard stories that he was kind of a strict boss, maybe is how to put it. Or?
I don't think that's totally fair. I think that when the stories that I've heard have more to do with the fact that wrangling.
He was like
all
wrangling
these other
cats,
pipe makers, wrangling all these other pipe makers, especially at that point in time, was a little bit challenging. And yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's a bunch of creative types.
And yeah, people
and they were making pipes by hand then. This was not like a big. You know, CNC sort of operation where they were cranking out bowls. Like W.L. Larson pipes, they were making them in a small workshop.
A lot of pipe makers get into pipe making because they want to be their own boss. They want to have the freedom to work when they want to. And so, yeah, the stories I've heard of former supervising the W.L. Larson shop was having to balance those creative types and, you know, balance it being a professional workplace.
And still have a big order that was needed to ship to the U.S. tomorrow or whatever. Yeah, totally. But so yeah, I think a lot of also the classic W.O. Larson shapes that we think of that became catalog standards were coined by Former. Totally. Certainly a lot of these classic Danish forms cemented by him. And then moving on a little bit forward, you had the Bentley production, which was happening in Switzerland and then Germany. And then back to Denmark, I would say about 20 or 25 years ago. And that's when he really switched focus to his own personal former brand of pipes handmade. So yeah, really, really interesting career, illustrious career. Like I said, very few people out there can boast more pipes completed in their lifetime, and I think where he ended up in the last 20 years of his career is, like I said, definitely one of the living legends of the Danish pipe makers. And for very many, I think I hear this especially among pipe makers. Like there are a lot of collectors out there that love Former's work and are very loyal to it, have like a cult-like following. But I also hear from so many other pipe makers all over the world that he's widely regarded as kind of the man. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like in the same way that Tom is, for a whole bunch of the same reasons. Like these guys that just, it was about making good pipes that people would enjoy smoking and preserving the classic Danish lines.
In my personal experience, it seems that at pipe shows or you know, traveling, when I'm smoking a Former pipe, very rarely does a collector or another pipe smoker notice it and say, "Oh, what are you smoking?" Because you know, it's a pretty standard classic billiard.
Sort of unassuming.
It's ubiquitous, arguably. Most of the people that notice what I'm smoking and ask what it is,
that's nice.
It's a pipe maker.
It's a pipe
maker. They're like, oh, what is that?
Yeah, I've received many compliments on the Former pipes in my collection from other pipe makers for sure. And then, of course, you also have stuff that's arguably just more stunning than and interesting and unique. And I love the playful stem work on a lot of the freehand shapes. Just that one example there.
I think another thing that sort of cements his legacy or speaks to his renown is pipe makers that have gone and visited him earlier in their careers. Like names that come to mind are David Huber from the U.S., more recently Sabina in Portugal, more recently Tina Balabi. So the fact that other pipe makers are seeking Former out and asking his advice on stuff speaks to his legend, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, a long time ago, Per and Ulf from S-Bang told me a story that when they originally took over the S-Bang brand in 1984 and wanted to sort of transform the brand from a little bit more of a mass-produced workshop. Mass-produced isn't the right word, but they were making a lot more pipes pre-1984. So a workshop that produced a pretty high number of pipes, what they wanted to do was instead focus on quality and taking the pipes to the next level. And I think that's what most of us think of when we think of S-Bang is like the pristine finishes, stem work, shape work, like just everything on point. And the two people that they sought out at that time to help them get to that next level were Konovitz and Former.
That's cool. I didn't know.
Yeah, and like that little circle of guys too. Like I said, I mean, there's things where stylistically you have a lot of influence from the sort of Sixten disciples, and then on the like craft side, like it's honestly people that come out of that sort of Paul Rasmussen line through Anna Julia to Tom and Former. And like I think of those, that is the sort of division between what made Danish pipe making the powerhouse that it is. Is you had a perfect confluence of the mix of craft and the daring new design directions that they were taking.
Yeah, and the slight aesthetic differences, if you will, between like the Sixten disciples or workshop and then the W.O. Larson and then like Pipe Dan. And kind of today those have kind of converged to create what we call classic Danish style.
And yes, Konovitz had a little bit of influence from both. You know, his father had worked with Paul, if I'm not mistaken. He definitely worked with W.O. Larson as well, and Stanwell and Sixten. So yeah, it's all very intertwined.
Yeah, incestuous, if you will.
Yeah, sure. It's all very intertwined.
Positive way, yeah.
But back to Former specifically, like I said, I think that all over the world these days, his takes on many, many classic shapes are really benchmarks.
Totally, yeah.
And it's easy to see why. Like
if you like classic shapes and you like artisan handmade stuff, there's kind of no one else to point to at the top than someone like Former.
Or at the very least, he's among just a handful of peers. So
and specifically, I think it's safe to say his apple shapes are the most iconic or the most sought after. I know your collection is, as you're smoking right now, primarily apples.
I think I'm pretty close to a 2-week apple set.
If I'm not, a box for it, 14 pipe box.
Yeah. Or a really big leather briefcase.
And while a lot of them are similar in design, like that one and this one are pretty similar, he also does different sort of renditions, so he plays within the same shape.
That's one of the fun things about collecting his work for me, and I've had this conversation with some other collectors out there. Shout out to my homie Neil. Looking at something like just Former's apple, you have obviously the rusticated, which is kind of the like most iconic signature version of that, but then you have all sorts of different variations in size and shaping differences. Something like this, slightly on the taller side, slightly closer to a brandy, and then also that has that really awesome silver work and stem work that echoes the flair of the silver. And then you have like straight classics, something like this, which is pretty standard with a slightly longer shank.
Right.
Taper stems, saddle stems, army mounts, like it's kind of an endless...
yeah, I think one thing special about Former and classic shapes specifically is, you can dismiss it and be like, oh, classic shapes are boring or they're all the same. But if you study Former's work, you see a lot of the same shapes, but you notice how different they can be based on specific aspects. Like you alter the shank, you alter the stem base, you alter the adornment, and it really does change the design if you study it.
And we've said this plenty of times in other contexts, but like it really is 10 times as difficult to make a pipe like this and have it be like perfect than it is to make something like this and have it be perfect. Which I actually really love this pipe too. This was something that we just got from him. I was at Former's workshop a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago,
maybe, yeah.
And brought back a couple of new pieces for us. So some of this isn't on the site at this time. It might be by the time you see this video, or it might be long gone by the time you see this video. But this is him sort of returning to a little bit of his roots as well, and touching back on the old style freehand shapes that were super popular in the late 60s and into the early 70s. But anyway, not to say that it isn't difficult to make any pipe, because it is. I've tried. I'm terrible at it. But when you're talking about classic forms, there's nothing to hide behind.
Right. The fewer lines you have, the lower the margin of error.
It's so much easier to see something that's incorrect or something that's
awkward
off.
Proportion, or a line that isn't balanced or straight.
Absolutely. And proportion, that's an interesting thing, because for me, even the pipe that you're smoking, like that is somewhat outside of most of what I think of as either conventional Anglo-French proportions or even more modern Danish proportions.
Yeah, it's a little stouter and
it's a little stouter, but like to the side that I would say you would see, like I said, maybe Perrin Olf and maybe Konovitz making a pipe like that. It probably you would see a shorter stem relation to the shank. You would see maybe a little bit more of a taper. That's sort of what we think of in the modern context of where Danish classics ended up after the 70s, 80s, into the early 90s and 2000s. That sort of really nice gradual taper and a shorter stem.
Yep.
That is just like a playful rendition that's sort of an amalgam of a bunch of different tastes, and yet it's executed perfectly. And I think that's one of the things about Former's work that I love the most is, again, the man could make 100 apples, and I could sit there and look at all of them and be like, Jesus, like there is almost no repetition in any of these. And even on the classic side, and I think some of the best examples of that would be maybe this pipe here, maybe this pipe here. Yes, we have a rough top, but like using the silver, turning a flare on the silver. Sorry, let me get that balanced. I also just put these out of order, but we'll figure that out. And the stem work. A lot of the stem work, too, I think is something that, like, this is the kind of stuff that you would see pretty often back in the day when they were just having a little bit more fun. The pipe industry was totally crazy coming out of the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, and the demand worldwide for Danish pipes started to explode. So the desire to have new and fresh models and ideas all the time really drove a lot of this innovation.
Yeah, playing with stem length.
Playing with stem length.
Like that.
But yeah, this sort of like different take on like a rounded shank face or a dome saddle. I love the kind of stuff that he does. And actually, none of this is new. It's just stuff that has continued to evolve very slowly over the decades and that he is preserving in new ways.
Yeah, when we were setting these up, I think these stacks stood out to me as something that, not that he doesn't make, but we don't see very often.
Yes. So one thing about this, well, I love this take on it because that's, obviously the bamboo extension, and you have a little bit of that playful stem work as well, like turning a flare that looks a lot different than what you see in most modern artisanal pipe making. These are both sort of a callback to like the W.O. Larson days, way, way, way back when he was just a young man managing the workshop. And the interesting thing about these two pipes in particular, and I had a long conversation with Former about them, this is what they would have considered a classic flake pipe back in the day.
Like fold and stuff method?
Exactly. And that was technically the original intention behind that sort of...
Which, fold and stuff, if you don't know, that's when you take a flake, you don't rub it out into a ribbon, but you just fold the flakes and stuff them straight into the chamber.
So it's not just that this is a tall chamber, because many pipes have tall chambers, it's also the width.
Right.
So a slightly
more... relationship between the height and the width.
Yes, yeah. So extended height and a little bit more narrow of a bowl, with the intent to smoke flakes sort of stuffed straight in there intact. Now, of course, you can smoke any tobacco you like in any size chamber, but there are some, I would say, universally observed truths that like a really broad chamber is really good for mixtures, and typically flakes smoke really nice if you fold and stuff them in a narrow chamber. But yeah, so I love that too, because again, it sort of speaks to this idea that when these guys began their careers crafting pipes, they were all smokers themselves, and what they were doing was a little bit. It was a mix between the beauty of the wood and what the wood determined the shape should be.
Sure.
Because I've heard Former say many times that sometimes you get a block of wood and it's a horn and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's like this beautiful, perfectly arcing straight grain, and the plateau on the bottom. It's like, that has to be a horn. I can't do anything about it. It's out of my hands. But something like this, I really like because they were making models specifically with the smoker in mind.
For how they smoke,
and the function in mind. And I also love the form of these pipes as well.
I just noticed that has a slightly oval shank.
It does.
Yeah. Really cool.
Really, really cool. And it's a subtle detail like that just makes all the difference with a pipe like this.
Also, I think, a lot of people don't understand, or especially if you're new to the hobby, don't recognize that a billiard like this, which is what a stack is, a taller billiard, if you do the bowl perfectly upright, it's actually going to look wrong or off.
Or it looks like the momentum is in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it looks like the bowl, even if it's perfect 90 degrees at the transition, it's going to look like it's falling backward a little bit. And to keep that height consistent and keep the taper consistent while also balancing the position is really impressive.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to see why these pipes are in demand. It's easy to see why, after this long, illustrious career, in many ways, and I've had this conversation with other pipe makers, in many ways, it surprises me still that at this point in Former's career, he's still making things that are new and exciting, and also just killer. I mean, this pipe right here, it's out of my size range perfectly, but the design itself, the lines, the execution, the grain, absolutely outstanding. And then you have this tiny little playful element, which again is not new, and we've seen it a couple times in the last few years, and I've actually encouraged him myself to be like, hey, you should do some more stuff like that. But this little concave detail on the rim here, it does so much to this pipe, which otherwise still would have been a gorgeous pipe. Rounded over slightly, a lot of bird's eye there, or even maybe with a rough top. But little details like that is how you can take more or less just a handful of classic forms and turn it into a 65-year career. And I just think that's so impressive. And there's so many pipes even on this table that like I'm seriously considering for my own collection, because I know how they're going to smoke, and obviously I love how they look.
I also love his brown blasts. Like they're pretty distinctive. In the slight, I don't know how he does it. You can probably speak to that, but the two-tone effect he has.
Yes. I'm not 100% sure how he achieves that particular effect. Now, something like this on the sandblasted finish, first of all, too, there is a little bit of, I guess, lore here in the sense that sandblasting, modern pipe sandblasting, and taking it to its extreme, like really craggy, really detailed stuff. It was inspired by the early work of the Dunhill sandblast, patent era sandblast, which actually was more or less an accident.
Yeah, they were kind of dialing in the depth.
Sure. And also I think there was just something about the wood back then could have been a little bit softer. Like it's a whole host of things that.
But they weren't as experienced because they were the first ones to do
it. Yeah. So anyway, you think of like this really craggy, modern, defined sandblast really came out of the late 90s and early 2000s American pipe making movement, and that has driven that forward. So Danish style sandblasting has always been really shallow in depth, detailed, but like not overly craggy, preserving the lines.
Low profile, if you will.
But for a very long time, many people have considered Former, especially in Denmark, to be not only very, very skilled in the sandblasting cabinet, but his sandblasted finishes in general are like really sought after and admired and often copied. So something like this is a traditional black blast, which actually has a dark layer of red stain as the base coat. Yep. And you can see that on the rim. The rim is finished that way, and it comes through in the pipe just a little bit.
Yeah, if you get in the right light, it gives off sort of a plum kind of tone to it.
Yes, absolutely. And then something like this, the same thing. I'm actually fairly certain that this is not a contrast and that this is just one color.
Right.
And what actually happens is that through very, very careful control during the buffing process, the peaks are brought out just a little bit. Now, I've seen that effect done by other pipe makers, and it comes out a little more contrasty, for lack of a better term. And I love the subtlety to Former's version of it.
It's earthy, it's rustic, but it's elegant and beautiful.
It doesn't look unnatural.
No.
And sometimes you have those finishes where it looks like they were actually sanded back a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the grain on this pipe is insane. And I do love the tone of his sandblast, and it's relatively unique. I can't really think of many other tan blasts or brown blasts that come out quite like this. And a lot of that is proprietary staining techniques and stains, some of which he might have stocked up on decades ago and aren't made
decades
anymore.
Of experimenting
and
with
decades of experimenting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the moral of the story for any aspiring pipe makers out there, or even experienced pipe makers out there. This kind of work happens when you are dedicated to a craft, a very specific craft, for your entire life. From 16 years old, I believe Former turned 82 or 83 last December. We're closer to 70 years of pipe making than not.
Which is crazy.
He had a 60th anniversary, 2018 or 19, something like that. And yeah, it's just, the work speaks for itself. Again, I think they are contagious if you're a collector. I don't know very many collectors that have one Former pipe. I feel like once you get into it, it's something that it's like, man, something about the way his stems are profiled and cut. Obviously, the smoking qualities and the design and the sheer breadth of his design language and pipe making abilities.
Yeah, we'd really encourage you to study his work, I guess you could say, because there is a lot to appreciate, and not only will you just appreciate it in general, but you'll learn a lot about pipes and other pipes as well.
And the history of Danish pipes.
By studying his work.
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous stuff.
So, thank you, Former.
Thank you, Hans,
for your dedication and your skill
and your influence.
Yeah, your commitment to doing it for this long.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.